is not a parent. And unfortunately, we saw a tremendous increase in fake families of adults, unfortunately, using
Secretary,
children.
but you and I both know that the number of fraudulent families, as they're classified, are statistically insignificant.
That's
in terms
incorrect.
of them crossing
That's
the border.
incorrect.
What's the percentage of fraudulent
It's
families?
over 500 families, and out of the 49,000 children that HHS had in its care that were unaccompanied, under 2,000 were because of the fact that their parents chose to break the law.
The El Paso sector just released numbers that showed of the families that they found to be fraudulent, it's less than 1% of all the families crossing at that time.
But that's one of 90 border crossings.
That is one of the most highly trafficked sectors.
Right, so 1% still is
at
a
the same
substantial
time,
number.
How fair is it to hold up a statistical insignificant number as a priority for you? Why does that justify family separation?
Well, because I think it's not about justifying it. My point is that what we need to be focused on together is trying to stop all of this horror of these families coming in this way. We don't want them to have to go to a smuggler or a trafficker. I guess what I'm saying is one woman who's raped, one child who's exploited is too many. So the system needs to be changed so that they don't have to come that way, which is why, among many other things, I proposed legislation to Congress to allow families and individuals to claim asylum before they ever get to the United States so that they don't have to take this journey, which is so horrible.
Did people ever specifically raise to you the concern that children would be traumatized as a result of this policy?
Not when I was writing, not during that
Not
memo,
directly
no.
to you. You never heard those concerns?
Not from staff, no. I mean, I think the biggest...
From child welfare experts, anyone
from
outside
the
government?
From the biggest... This was nothing new, to be clear. So from a staff perspective, I think, there was this belief that to not enforce the law would encourage trafficking, would encourage children to be used as pawns. And the law enforcement officials had taken an oath, which is why the operational entities recommended that we choose to enforce the law. We never forced it 100%. If you had two parents coming across, we chose specifically not to refer both parents so that one parent could stay with the children. As I said, we did try to limit as much as possible any tender age situation. But it clearly wasn't working. So we stopped it during an executive order. And we have been hopeful that Congress will look at this and really take very seriously what is the best way to do this. I mean, the debate is very false. We don't have to choose between protecting vulnerable populations and securing the border. That's a false choice. We don't have to choose between keeping out opioids and facilitating trade. We can do all of these things at the same time, but they do require changes to the laws. So that's what I hope we can all come together to work on, because none of these things should even be, something that we have to...
Some of your public defenses of the policy at the time. In June of 2018, you went out to the White House press briefing room, and you said very clearly the administration did not create a policy of separating families. That same month, DHS released numbers that said over 2,000 children had been separated from their parents at the border. So why did you say what you did?
So if a family comes to a legal port of entry, I specifically chose, when asked if I would do otherwise, not to separate that family. Because they hadn't broken any laws, there was no need to separate them, in my opinion.
I'm asking about the families that
and
were
I'm
separated.
telling you why it's not a policy. So Interior, under my watch, we didn't separate families in the Interior. We didn't separate them at legal ports of entry, and as I already mentioned, if you had two parents, we did not refer both to prosecution. So the policy was not to separate. The policy was to enforce the law as a law enforcement agency. By the way, a law that we didn't pass, a law that we tried to work with Congress to change and make more sense given the flows, but it's not a policy.
I do want to make clear, you say you were enforcing the law. That is a significant change from the way the law was previously enforced. So that is a big policy shift, at the very least.
So under previous administrations, they also enforced this exact law. What is different is the numbers of people have greatly increased over the last few years. And as I mentioned, the number of families have increased over the last few years. But no, this is a law that was enforced in exactly the same way in previous administrations. The
Secretary
numbers
Nielsen,
aren't the same.
Officials from the previous administration I've spoken to have said that they always veered on the best interests of the child, that only if there was an immediate harm to the child would they choose to separate. And that's why we did not see thousands of children, as we saw with this administration, separated.
But we didn't see thousands of children because there weren't thousands of families. So it's what I'm trying to tell you, that the flow is very different. But actually, longstanding CBP policy has been, as you're describing, to only separate when there is an issue that favors the child to separate. So there's a communicable disease, there's a criminal history of the parent is not the parent, there's clear abuse, or if the parent has to go to a custodial location. If any parent in this
When you say a
room-
custodial location, you mean the decision to prosecute, which was a policy change from DOJ.
wasn't
I
a
want to be
policy-
clear about that this was
I
new
understand that the
related
change,
to the past administration.
The change was, rather than enforcing the law, the change was let's enforce the law with zero tolerance. That's what the Attorney General said. Let's not exempt any group of people. Let's encourage everyone to go to ports of entry and come here legally. It is a law. Let's enforce the law. We're law enforcement agencies.
You testified before Congress about this policy as well in May of 2019, and you said that no parents were deported without the chance to reunite with their children. We now know that hundreds of parents were deported without their children.
So
why did you say what you said?
Yeah, so that's ongoing litigation. As I understand it, what the judge found is, as is practice, not only does CBP ask, or ICE in that case, ask the parent, but when we deport someone, or someone is deported, which by the way is not a decision DHS makes, that's a Department of Justice decision, the parents are asked if they want to bring their children with them. And in many, many cases, for a variety of reasons, they don't want to bring their children with them. They would prefer to leave the children in the United States. So many parents left without their children. As part of that case, the judge, the ACLU, others asked that we go back again to the parents, find them wherever they had gone home to, and ask again, do you want your children with you? And in many cases, then they said no, they wanted their children in the United States. Now,
were you aware when you testified that hundreds of parents had been deported without their kids?
I'm still not sure that's an accurate fact because it's not what the judge has found. So they were deported without their children, but with their complete knowledge.
Let me ask you about the federal government's ongoing efforts to reunite some of those children who were separated. There's now a new report out. On Friday, a government official said that the judge overseeing the effort to reunite them, the federal government could have separated an additional almost 1,300 children before this policy was ever officially put into place. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think the U.S. government's responsibility should be to make sure that all of those children are reunited with their parents?
To use every possible method possible. I mean, there shouldn't. The law is difficult because when HHS, as you know, is the agency who cares for the children, not DHS, it's HHS. But HHS under law has to find a sponsor for the child. That's what they're required to do. What we need to do is understand that when a parent is present in the United States, we need to first and foremost reunite the child with that parent, assuming that that's what both the parent and the child want, as opposed to trying to find another sponsor. There's differences in the law, too. If you're from Mexico and you don't have any parents here, we have the legal right to work with the consulate to send you back to your family in Mexico. If you're from other countries, we don't have that ability. You can't send the children home. They have to be placed with a sponsor in the United States. So we should do everything possible. I mean, there's no question there.
To be clear, the U.S. government is currently not doing everything possible. It's led largely by immigration groups and by nonprofits.
I'm not in the government right now, but I'm also not part of Health and Human Services.
You are with the administration right now, though, right? You did accept a position with the Advisory Council?
I'm not with the administration right now.
The White House put out a press release saying that you had rejoined.
No. What the White House did was say that they had asked me as an expert in critical infrastructure and cybersecurity to join CEOs throughout the country as part of an advisory council. None of us are paid. None of us work for the White House. We use our expertise to try to advise government on what we need to do in cyber and critical
You're currently advising the White House. Can I ask what led you to resign?
And by the way, so are other CEOs, though. I mean, are you telling every CEO in here that they should never advise the government on how to make something work?
I'm interviewing you right now, so I'm asking you, before we turn to questions, what led you to resign from this administration?
What led me to resign is there were a lot of things that there were those in the administration who thought that we should do. And just as I spoke truth to power from the very beginning, it became clear that saying no and refusing to do it myself was not going to be enough. So it was time for me to offer my resignation. That's what I did.
Secretary Nielsen, thank you for taking the time to answer
No problem.
my
I
questions.
wish we had gotten to cyber because that's why I was originally here. It was for a cyber panel. So let me just quickly say it's Cyber Awareness Month.
Cyber is the biggest threat that we face in the Homeland today. It does take each of us to do our part. It's a weakest link problem. Third-party risk is the biggest thing we face. And as we move towards elections, the other thing I just wanted to say quickly is remember, if you go to vote and for any reason you are not on the voter database, you are guaranteed by right a provisional ballot. Please use it.
That is our time. I apologize, we don't have time for the audience. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You can leave this way.
That was intense. And so I just want to acknowledge that. It's a little awkward making a segue that doesn't acknowledge that, so I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that before we move on to the rest of the programming. Okay, we are going to move along. We have many more conversations to follow that I think are just as important to be having here, okay? We're going to move on to technology, running technology companies